You're listening to The Stall and Stable Show. Ideas for happy horsekeeping.
Wowie! We are finally here in our southern home for the winter. Me, Buck, Susie, Rhode, Clarabelle, Jack, Lola, and Cheeto. We drove 18 hours with a trailer full of hay and a truck full of cats, and we've landed safely at our farm in Aiken, South Carolina. Well, technically, we're in Windsor, a little hamlet within the Aiken community. It took a lot of planning to get here, and I can't wait to share part 2 of this big journey with you. So listen in. This is episode 130 of the Stall and Stable Show, brought to you by American Stalls. Today is Wednesday, November 29th, 2023. I'm your host, Helena Harris. The Stall and Stable Show is made possible in part by American Stalls and by listeners like you. To support the show, go to stallandstable.com and click on Support the Podcast. Welcome back, listeners. Boy, oh boy, is this episode overdue. Yes, I'm late, but you know what else is new? I'll probably be late to my own funeral. I'm recording this from my new office/studio, which is a converted construction trailer that came with the new property that we purchased that we now call Who To in Aiken, South Carolina. As I said, technically we're in Windsor, which is right on the border, right on the line. It is part of the Aiken community. Our property is surrounded by several other horse farms, and my 3 horses are in heaven. Yeah, and it's absolutely incredible. They are behaving in ways I expected, but also in many ways that I did not expect. So I'm going to touch on all of this over time. And then I'm going to also have Buck come on, and the two of us are going to give you a play-by-play of what it was like getting down here. Suffice it to say for now that traveling 18 hours, let's say, 18 hours in a pickup truck pulling a 2-horse bumper pull full of hay and 3 cats in the back seat. Now, our pickup truck doesn't have the full crew cab back seat. It's the half cab. And our cats are fairly large, so their carriers are fairly large. There was not a lot of room back there. And, they haven't really traveled long distances before. Jack, our Maine Coon, he's a senior cat. He's 16 years old, but he's in good health and he's good-natured. So we figured, all right, and the young ones, figure they're young enough to handle something new like this. So I was concerned mostly about Jack. It turns out that these 3 cats were just phenomenal. The first hour was a bit crazy, but they just settled down into like, okay, this is what we're doing. This is where we're going to live for the next, I don't know, forever maybe. So after about an hour and a half, 2 hours, traveling with them in the truck, secured in their carriers, and everyone settled, we opened the doors to their carriers and let them kind of meander about the truck. We blocked off the driver's area. So Buck was driving the first part. We blocked off the driver's side area with some cushions. And they were great. They explored a little bit for the first 5 or 10 minutes that they were out. And we didn't let them all out at the same time. We let one cat out at a time and let them acclimate, put them back in, let another cat out, and so on. So, once they realized, hey, we're with our family, we're in this moving vehicle, things are okay, we've got a little potty down on the floor, we think we'll be all right, they all just kind of settled down. Lola decided she wanted to sleep on top of the carrier. So did Jack. And Cheeto felt most comfortable somewhere under her seat, because that's Cheeto. He talks a big game, but he's a mama's boy at the end of the day. The drive down was quite pleasant. It's always stressful getting out of the Northeast. In fact, it's more stressful getting from Rhode Island to New Jersey, honestly. New England, for some reason, is just so full of tension. And then when we get over the Tappan Zee Bridge, or the Cuomo Bridge now we're in my home territory. So I grew up just outside of the city in Rockland County. And once I get over the Tappan Zee Bridge and we're headed toward the Garden State Parkway, this is my home turf. So I'm very comfortable driving through there. And let's see. So you go down the Garden State Parkway. We really didn't hit much traffic. We got onto the New Jersey Turnpike, which to me is great, especially since they got rid of tolls. And of course, there's the separation. If you've driven on the New Jersey Turnpike, you'll know that there's a separation between commercial vehicles, trucks and that sort of thing, and passenger vehicles. Thankfully, our truck and trailer qualified as passenger vehicle, so we were able to travel on the car side and didn't have the stress of being sandwiched in between tractor trailers. And the rest of it was just kind of dreamy, even getting through DC. So there's a secret way to kind of get around DC and Baltimore, and I found it by accident. Actually, Siri and Apple Maps had me go that way once when it was there was a backup at the Baltimore Tunnel. At first, when I followed her directions, I had just switched over from using Google Maps to Apple Maps. And when I first started following Siri's directions using Apple Maps, I'm like, wow, she's pretty accurate. Maybe I should use her for my long trips, as well as some of these smaller ones. So the day she had me take an exit, I think we went over the Delaware Bridge, and she had me take an exit that I wasn't expecting. And I thought, all right, she's been pretty good. Let's just do it. It was low risk. It was just me and my truck. I took the exit and I thought, oh, I don't know. Where are we going, Siri? This doesn't look right. Well, after about a mile, we ended up on the Blue Star Memorial Parkway through Delaware. That takes you all the way down to Annapolis over the Bay Bridge. And you avoid Baltimore, you avoid the tunnel, you avoid all of that traffic going into Baltimore. And then I think it's the Baltimore-Washington Parkway, right, from Baltimore to DC, which is always, I have a word in mind, but I'm not going to use it. This is a clean episode. It's always a hassle. So this alternate route was amazing. And it's so beautiful and there's no cars there. And, it's regular highway speeds. It relieves so much of the stress of traveling. I can't say it enough. So it pops you out just east of DC. So you still have to deal with some DC traffic, of course. And I remember from doing this route years and years and years ago, the stretch between DC and Richmond, Virginia, wasn't too bad. Once you got outside of the city limits and the basic traffic, DC traffic, it wasn't too bad because Richmond was Richmond, but it wasn't congested. That has changed in the last 10 years, probably more so in the last 3 to 5 years because COVID has ushered in a lot of people who are living in smaller cities now because they don't have to live in the bigger cities, so they can go to places like Richmond. All this to say, there was a bit of traffic getting between DC and Richmond. Okay, big whoop. We decided to do the trip in 2 legs because we didn't know what it was going to be like with the cats. And we also didn't want to be racing the horses, who I had shipped commercially. And they were going through, it was 1 trip, 2 drivers. So we didn't want to race them. And I was lucky enough to be able to hire Coach Jen as my receiver. She was here at Hutu, and her job was to make sure that everything was hunky-dory and to receive the horses as they got off the trailer and get them settled into a safe routine until we got here, which was only going to be 24 hours later. So we stayed in a hotel just over the North Carolina border. I think it was Rocky Mount. And we brought the cats in there, and they were fine. They thought it was great, great fun to explore this hotel room. And then, we slept. That was it. We got a good night's sleep. We got up at the crack of dawn the next morning and then finished the last 5.5, 6 hours of the journey. And whenever I do a long trip, I try to do the longest, hardest part first and then leave a much shorter leg for the second part. So, once we got up and we were ready to get on the road again, looking at a 5-hour trip versus a 13-hour trip was much more palatable to both Buck and me. The interesting thing is I was really appreciative. of the experience that I got driving my trailer down 95 for long periods of time, especially at night. So on that first leg, even though we left super early in the morning, it was dark by the time we got to North Carolina. I mean, it was only like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, kind of dark because it gets dark earlier this time of year. But I think I ended up driving like 3 hours in the dark before we got to the hotel. On 95, pulling a full horse trailer, not horses, just hay, but just getting a sense of this is what it's like to drive my particular rig on a highway for long periods of time. And I was surprised at how comfortable I felt. I don't have a lot of experience driving my trailer on the highway. So having this opportunity to get some experience without the risk was great. Of course, we all know how things change once you have your horse in the back of the trailer. Hopefully, most of that highway experience and the confidence I gained from it will translate over once I'm hauling live horses. Once we got to Windsor and Hoo, it was a joy to pull up onto our farm and to see Jennifer smiling and happy and my horses eating hay and drinking water and looking like, yeah, you know what? This isn't so bad. That was a tremendous relief. And I would highly recommend that anybody who is moving horses or moving farm or family or home long distances, that you consider having someone at your property there to receive your horses if you are en route a day later. Could we have come earlier and been here to receive the horses? Yes and no. No, because our property is a little bit difficult in Rhode Island to access. Judge Manning, who's the transport company that I hired, was fantastic, and the rig that they sent was smaller. It wasn't a full tractor trailer. They were able to fit into our property very easily. But I also wanted to make sure that my horses loaded well. And, just because you think your horses are clicker trained to self-load on a trailer does not mean they're going to walk onto a strange, new, completely different rig. And that was the case with my 3 horses. We tried to load Clarabelle first, but it turns out that Susie was the one who we were able to get to load. The ramp on their rig was very steep. And it's different. It looked different. It smelled different. It was blue. They were like, whoa, this is not Mama's bumper pole. So it took a while. And I'm really grateful to the fellows who were driving the truck for their patience. And, they were really supportive. I said, I'm sorry this is taking so long, but I really don't want this to be a negative experience for my horses. And they said, we're so glad to see somebody who's willing to take the time. He's like, we're making the trip no matter what happens. We would much rather have settled horses on our truck than stressed out horses. So we used a lot of positive reinforcement, and we had to use a little bit of traditional tap, tap, tap with a dressage whip. And when I say tap, 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 I didn't even need to touch my horses. I just needed to kind of wave it behind me. They all walked on very well. Clarabelle jumped on. Yeah, she jumped. But it was great. Honestly, it was great. And then, of course, getting off the trailer was similar. Brody and Susie walked off. Clarabelle jumped off. So we know we'll have some work to do with Clarabelle. Okay, that is the trip getting here. That was the trip down. We're going to take a quick break to hear from American Stalls, and then I'll be back to tell you about our first week here. Your horses deserve the best. That's why I partnered with and recommend investing in stable components and accessories from American Stalls. Their products are made from the highest quality materials, best practices in construction, and are designed to provide your horses with the safety, comfort, and well-being they deserve in their home. To find what's best for your horses, shop American Stalls online. You can find them at americanstalls.com. Okay, the first week. So interesting. So some of you may know, and if you don't, that's okay. I'll repeat it. The cottage at Hutu is tiny. It's 600 square feet. And that was part of the draw for us. We didn't want a big farmhouse. We wanted something that was small, easy to keep clean, easy to maintain, but that had lots of land so that the horses can do what the horses need to do. Just because the house is tiny doesn't mean there wasn't work to be done. And that work, it's not that it's necessary. It's a plug-and-play cottage, but there were certain changes that I wanted to make in order to make it feel homey and like Helena. And I love to set up homes. And I'm pretty good at it, actually. So we had some painting to do. We had lots of stuff to buy. So there were many, many, many trips to Target and Home Depot and the grocery store, but mostly Home Depot. And then the barn situation is kind of interesting. So we bought a property, and you could say it has a barn on it, but technically it has two barns on it. One is newer, and it's sort of a run-in shelter with stalls. I guess it's one of those open-air shelters, but it has stall enclosures. And then the other is the original barn that was on the property. And I call it a cow barn, but that might not be accurate. To me, any barn with a practically flat roof, I call a cow barn. I don't know why. But it's got a flat roof, and it's only about 8, from floor to ceiling, it's only about 8.5 feet tall. But that has the feed room in it. It's got an enclosure. It's stone dust footing. It's where the previous owner stored her hay and her wheelbarrows. So, you're like, all right, this is a great utility shed. It has electricity and water. So that's like the working area. That's the working barn. And then you've got the run-in barn, which is about 70 yards away and at the entrance to the large pasture, which is about 6 acres. So when you're moving horses, and I think this is good not just for my horses, but I think for any horses who are being moved from one place to another, who are not used to it, you want a smaller area. You don't want to just let them off the truck and pop them out into a large field. There's going to be excitement. There's going to be running and galloping and rolling and bucking. And it's just too much space at first. We don't want anybody to strain a ligament or fall into a hole or just hurt themselves. We want to transition them slowly. So before we shipped the horses down, we came down and we set up a sacrifice paddock, a smaller area with hot tape. And I'm so sick of hot tape, I can't even begin to tell you, but it's useful. And we didn't want to make an investment in permanent fencing until we knew exactly how we were going to use the property. So 6 acres is already cross-fenced. The entire property is perimeter fenced. 6 acres is cross-fenced. There's still plenty of room for us to play with, add more paddocks or what have you. But we didn't want to invest in anything permanent until, again, we knew how we were going to use the property. So we have this sacrifice paddock set up, which is great. And the sacrifice paddock is between these two barn structures. Jen and I had come to the farm in September, and we went through the older barn, the cow barn, and we got it all set up. We made it safe as sort of a loafing area. We put some boards up. We kept, to keep the horses away from anything that was sharp. We took out nails and old mesh fencing. You know the drill. Anything that horses can get cut on or step on, they will. So Jen and I went through that barn, and we tried to make it as safe as possible. And I set up a section of it as a grooming aisle. Again, because it just has access to, it's right next to the tack room and the feed room, and there's water there and electricity. So I thought, this is great. The horses can hang around in this barn, if the weather's too hot or too windy, and it's, the area where I will work with them. And then if they need to stay in a stall for whatever reason, there's this newer, lower barn. But that barn has no water, no electricity, and it's completely open air. So if they're in that barn and it's windy, they'll get the wind. If it's windy and rainy, they're going to get cold and wet. So the benefit of the cow barn is that it's got 3 sides. It can protect them from the weather. There's enough room for all 3 horses to hang out in there. So I've got these 2 structures, and neither one of them is ideal. The cow barn, because the roof is so low and it had roofing nails sticking out of it, it's just not a place that I want my horses to hang out in. If one horse throws their head up, bam. So this is how the multiple trips to Home Depot came about. I have to use this barn, especially if it's windy and raining. I have to use it. So we went to Home Depot and we bought 1x3, it's called furring strip board. I'll take pictures of it and put them in the show notes. So Buck cut the wood strapping and he secured it to the roof to cover any old rusty nails that were sticking out through the roof. So that took care of one problem, old rusty roofing nails sticking out. And then because the ceiling joists are exposed, again, somebody throws their head up, they're going to bonk their head on one of those beams. So we went and bought plumbing insulation, pipe insulation, which is just the gray version of a pool noodle. And we got the pool noodles. So we got this insulation and we covered all the joists that were sticking down into the headspace. So if somebody does toss their head up, they're going to hit the foam insulation instead of the wood. Is it perfect? No. Does it reduce the risk of injury to these horses? Absolutely. So all of this just to say, we've got these 2 structures. The horses are safe. They're happy. But it does make doing barn chores very challenging. It also makes coming up with a routine or a system to care for them very challenging. I don't do well unless I have some kind of choreographed routine for taking care of my horses. Once you get a routine down, once you get the choreography of the care down, it becomes really efficient and really easy. And you also I'm less afraid of missing something, right? When something is systematized, it's harder to leave something out, to forget it. So one of the first things I purchased when we got down here was a whiteboard. I hung the whiteboard up in the old barn, in the grooming aisle, and I went to work on writing a step-by-step checklist. And this was more for me than for anybody else. It's so that I didn't forget, okay, I'm walking down to the lower barn and I'm bringing hay nets down there. What's down there that I can bring back? Can I put this in the wheelbarrow? Can I save trips, right? It's 100 yards. I don't want to be making a 100-yard trip any more than I have to. So these are the kinds of challenges that I've had in the first, let's see, I'm recording this, been here 10 days. And I'm still not 100%. I still don't have a full routine down yet. The other thing is, we don't want to make any changes, again, until we know how we're going to use the property in the long term. The first world equestrian problem that I have here that I didn't have back in Rhode Island is I have way too many choices. We have way too much property. I can do anything I want with it. The question is, what do I want to do? Right? First world equestrian problem. So to answer that, I'm going to let the horses tell me first. How do they use the property? What areas, they've been standing under the live oaks. There's a pair of live oaks in our pasture, and they've been standing under it. And we're trying to figure out why they stand under those trees, when they do, at different times of day, on different days, I'll see them standing under there. And, Brody's pretty good about choosing spaces that are comfortable. Back in Rhode Island, he will position himself in front of a stone wall on a cold day at a very specific angle of the sun. And that's because he's taking advantage of the thermal mass of the rocks. Rocks absorb heat from the sun. And then when the temperature gradient changes and the rocks become warmer than the ambient temperature, they'll kick the heat right back out. So they're like heat reflectors. And Brody has always done that. He's always found a spot on the property that makes him comfortable. So I'm kind of watching his lead. And because he's so confident and he's so laid back, the girls are following his lead. So wherever he likes to hang out, they will too. And as I'm speaking these words, I'm looking out the window of my office right now, and Brody is flat out on a hill in the pasture. Susie is laying down about 20 feet away from him, and it's Clarabelle's turn this time to be the sentinel. As stimulating as all of this activity and space may be for them, they are comfortable enough on this property to lay down and have a proper rest. There's so much I have to share with you about all of this. I'm going to get to a few more things, and then I'm going to wrap up, and we'll continue it in another episode. What I will say is that having a 6-acre pasture is fantastic for them. They have room to run if they want to. The sand footing is phenomenal, and Susie in particular loves it. If she's got a little extra energy that she needs to get out, or even Clarabelle, they're not afraid of falling. I can see the confidence in them when they're galloping or cantering. There's a lot less anxiety. So the footing is great. Right now, the grass is dormant, so there's not a whole lot of nutrition in it. I do need to bring in some experts, though, to find out exactly what winter pasture in South Carolina does and does not do for horses. I'll tell you, it does give them something to graze, because there are little bits of green throughout. We did not overseed with winter rye, which some people do around here. We didn't have time. We weren't ready for that. I don't even know if I want to do it. But there's enough there for them to graze. So that's number one. It gives them something to do where they can have their noses down to the ground, stretch that top line, take a deep breath. It also provides them way more opportunities for walking than any property I've ever had them on. They can come up from the pasture to the sacrifice paddock and the cow barn, and that's where I keep the water. So if they get thirsty, they have to walk all the way up to the water trough. Now, eventually, when it gets warmer, I'll put a whole nother trough in the pasture, because I want to make sure that there are no obstacles to them staying hydrated. Right now, everybody seems to be drinking very well, eating very well, but I do keep my water up near the barn to encourage them to walk. I also feed them hay in the sacrifice paddock, and that process has changed. So I'm going to do a whole nother episode on that. I am putting their hay in hay nets, very large ones, but I'm putting them on the ground. So if they're out in the pasture and they want to come in and they really need to eat some hay or they need to fill their bellies, they have to walk for it. What else do I have to say? Right now they're naked because they all have their winter coats. Clarabelle was a little skinny before we came down here. She got really chunky over the summer, so I put her on a bit of a diet, and I learned quickly that Clarabelle, and apparently thoroughbreds in general, can go up and down in weight very quickly. So the diet that I put her on, it took off a little bit too much weight. So when she got here, and right before, I was trying to fatten her up a little bit, and that seems to have worked very well. Brody gains weight in the winter, and while his last blood test showed that he was not at risk for any kind of metabolic issues, insulin resistance, PPID, etc., he is typey for it. So we got to keep an eye on his weight. So having 3 horses with 3 different nutritional needs and property layout, that's going to be a challenge that I have to figure out. Susie, she's pretty anxious. And it doesn't surprise me. Every time I've taken her off property, even when we traveled to Maine for training for a couple of months, her stomach gets sour very quickly, and then you're fighting ulcers for the next 30 days. What happens when she gets ulcery is she gets really spooky and even more anxious. The anxiety and the stress of traveling will create a lot more acid and ulcers. But then once she gets those lesions, you can see in her behavior, she's on guard. She's watchful. She's She just can't seem to settle. And that's the state that she's in right now. And while I don't feel like I need to have her scoped, I'm pretty sure that what we probably have is gastric ulcers and small ones. So I'm going to put her back on the regimen that I know works for her. And then focus really deeply on equine nutrition because we have so many options here. So many options, from the type of hay to the brands of feed to your pellet options. I cannot get over how many different forage options we have in addition to our pasture. So again, the problem I have is too many choices. Which ones are going to be best for my horses? Their inherent needs and then the kind of work that they're going to do. And don't even ask me about work. I have no idea. I did some groundwork with Susie. I lunged her a little bit. That went really well. Clarabelle we'll get to. And then Brody's going to need to move or he's going to get so fat. I'll get there. We're still settling. I thought, oh yeah, the horses will unload and in a week I'll be riding and I'll be doing all this. Psh, no. And I'm not in a rush. We are here all winter. I've got plenty of time. And if I've learned anything in all my years of horsekeeping, it is that when you introduce strict time limits or deadlines or time pressures, that's when things can go sideways. So I'm not going to pressure me or my horses to do anything right now other than get settled, observe their behaviors, keep an eye on their diet, groom them, do lots of groundwork, keep their feet clean, right? All those basic things. And then we'll get to work. So that's how we got here. There are a lot of comparisons that I'm making to our place in Rhode Island to this place, which are not fair, but which are valid. So I don't know if something can be unfair and valid at the same time, but I'll say that this place in South Carolina, Who To, compared to Who Hollow, I have to pat myself on the back a little bit for taking such a tiny, awkward space and keeping 3 horses relatively healthy and safe, Clarabelle notwithstanding, was no easy task. And the systems, the routines, all that I had to set up in order to achieve that, it was exhausting. And even after it was achieved, you have to micromanage it. That was also exhausting. So right now, even though we've got no system, it's this huge property, we've got lots of question marks about what horsekeeping is going to be like here at Who To, it is already at least 50% easier than it was back in Rhode Island. A lot easier. When you look out on a pasture and you see horses, I hate the phrase, but it applies, horses being horses. And we're going to talk about what that means and what that looks like in future episodes. But when you see that your horse's needs are met, and I talk about the 5 freedoms all the time, my horse's 5 needs are met right now. And that's with very minimal input from me. My input is food, water, and shelter. The rest, the property provides. So there's a lot to cover. And I think that this adventure that Buck and I are on will provide a ton of content and helpful information to you. And I'm going to try to leverage the differences between North and South. So if you're listening in a colder climate, I'll be able to talk about, obviously I know what it's like to keep horses in a cold climate and how miserable you can be in the winter, but also the benefits. There are some benefits of keeping horses in a cold climate. Thanks for following along thus far. We have so much great stuff on the horizon, especially after the new year. We've got some new content and new guests coming. I hope that you will bear with me because I do have a lot of balls in the air right now. I might not always get episodes up on the day that I want to, but if you have questions, please feel free to contact me. You can do so through stallandstable.com. There's a Contact Us page. I am taking consulting appointments. They are limited. So if you need some help or advice with your barn or your business, go to stallandstable.com. And when you click on the calendar and you click on book an appointment, my live calendar will be there. So you'll see what days and times I'm available. So I am available if you need consultations. Many, many thanks to our sponsor, American Stalls. Thank you for helping to make the Stall and Stable show possible. And listeners, if you have found Stall and Stable helpful in any way, we'd love it if you could show your support through a donation at stallandstable.com. And that is going to be a wrap for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it.